Hi, I'm Meg Major. Welcome to Grocery COVID Live. We've got a great lineup for our segment today that will broadly reflect the topics relating to where the industry goes from here as we enter the next level of our grocery gone wild world in which we now live. Joining me for our segment, per usual, is our exec editor, John Springer, our content manager, Kat Martin, and our senior editor, Jennifer Strailey. Phil, I see you're wearing a mask. Masks are certainly a hot topic, highly controversial. Let's get started with your thoughts about masks and retail associates.
Sure. Well, I'm wearing the mask for one particular reason. Not that I have to here in the office, certainly, but the reality is that it's become a hotbed of demonstrations around the country, a hotbed in supermarkets where, frankly, a lot of consumers want their workers in the store to be wearing masks to feel protected, but also on the other hand, the shopper needs to be wearing a mask also. If you go shopping, you might spend 22 minutes in that store or less these days to get your stuff and get out. But that worker is there for 10 or 12 hours, coming up against hundreds of people. So what I don't understand is how a lot of these anxieties are being manifested into the masks. And John, you just wrote a great piece about what happened yesterday with our vice president. Why don't
Yeah,
you
that was
tell us about it?
actually Friday. Yeah, Phil, thanks. There was an event in Iowa on Friday where leaders from throughout the food supply chain, from farmers to the CEOs of Smithfield and Tyson, the CEOs of Kroger and Hy-Vee, the Vice President of the United States, the two senators from Iowa, and the governor were all there to discuss effects of the pandemic on the food supply chain, and coverage of that event, which was an interesting event, and it had a lot of good content on it. It was sort of overshadowed by the fact that media coverage came out showing footage of the event before it started of Rodney McMullen and Ken Sullivan, the CEO of Smithfield, standing next to one another, and an aide walks up and asks them, take off your masks. And that was shortly before she went to the other side of the table, got the other guys to do it too. That was shortly before the vice president came out. We find out later that the vice president had arrived at that event only hours after learning that his press secretary had tested positive for coronavirus and was on his way home for the weekend to self-isolate because of the issues. And then a further irony is the discussion begins, and what happens? The CEOs talk to the vice president and tell them, "Well, thanks so much for all your help getting our workers masks, which are required for them to do their jobs." The optics of it just wasn't right for the situation, and I think there's a lot of debate about whether the president or the vice president are sending the right message by wearing a mask. I think there's a awful lot of pressure on federal officials to make things look better than they might necessarily be. And it just kind of, that part of it kind of threw a curveball to the whole event, which kind of overshadowed what would turn out to be a pretty serious discussion about the impacts to the supply chain, the food supply chain, that are really being felt throughout, the entire, from the farm to the fork, as they say.
John, one could say that the masks masked the bigger part of the discussion of what those guys are there for.
Yes, it did. Yes,
But
it
seriously, if we know that Fauci and everybody else is saying distancing and masks, why are we questioning this? We've got a minimum of 80,000 people who have died. Our numbers are extraordinary, more than in the rest of the world. We see what's happened with South Korea being able to, because of these kinds of constraints, flatten the curve for them. Is it, and obviously it's a rhetorical question, but is it that big of a deal for us to put masks on? I mean, when I leave the office and I walk home, I'm wearing a mask. And I would say that out of the 50 people that I pass, maybe 20 are wearing masks and another 30 are not. And yeah, I'm one of those people that give them a sly, dirty look. to try to make them feel guilty, but they don't feel guilty. What's the big deal about wearing a mask? As Meg said, yeah, it's uncomfortable. It fogs up your glasses, but I don't want to die, and I don't want anybody else to die.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. Here in New York, you can't get in any place without a mask on. The signs are on the stores, front windows. They're not going to let you in. And people are getting used to it. It's not such a big deal. I think that, some people feel like it might make them look silly. I think, as I mentioned
earlier, I look
there's
silly with this
issue. I think great with that.
Nothing silly about that, no.
People want to put an entire hood over my face. But, listen, it's not a big deal once you get used to it. And, listen, it's a big part of keeping people happy. And it's a small thing, but I think it's a big perception thing.
Right. And last week, sorry, I was just going to say that last week, your New York Governor, John Cuomo, in his daily briefing said that why aren't people wearing masks? It's just mutual respect. I don't understand. Maybe I'm not communicating this properly. My daughter says I'm not communicating this properly. So they're launching a whole campaign, and it's a contest to see, people can submit a campaign to get New Yorkers to wear masks, and whoever has the best one wins.
Well, it's also interesting how quickly this all happened too. I know, Phil, one of our very first Facebook Lives, you had asked the question, at some point, are we all going to be wearing masks? And all of us were kind of like, no, probably not. And here we are, less than 2 months later, and it's become something where you really feel weird if you're outside without one. But on the retail side, I think it's also putting our frontline employees in a bit of a bind. Because they're the ones being asked to enforce that policy in the stores that have it for customers to wear masks. And, it's how do you go about training your staff, who some of them are probably brand new because everybody's hired new employees, to ask a customer to put on a mask in order to shop in your store. So, I mean, it's created quite a issue that is shocking to me, that I didn't ever think would be an issue.
So a couple blocks away, we've got a convenience liquor store. So out front, there is a huge sign that says, "We will not serve you unless you wear a mask." You walk in, they have these 6-foot spacing. Then there's 2 registers, both that have the plastic. The cashiers behind the plastic are wearing masks. I was in there, and this guy walks in without a mask and without a shirt. And again, in Santa Monica, it was a warm day. And the owner, says, "Sir, I'm sorry, we have to, enforce this. You have to wear a mask." And he started cursing at him, yelling at him. Good news for the owner is he would not serve him. And the guy walks out in a huff. I mean, seriously. What can we do besides this huge signs on the little plexiglass, wear a mask, somebody telling you to do it? It's just not getting through. And let me just go to Facebook for a second. Dave Foreman is saying people are tired of the pandemic. So pandemic over, not, in big letters. And it's right. I keep on hearing that we're in, the second inning of 9 innings on the pandemic. It's not over. And yes, we are tired of being home. We are tired of doing all this stuff. But if we are, in fact, at the second inning, not the 9th inning, we're going to have to wear masks for a long time.
Yeah, there's also a strong strain of libertarianism in the country that is not only feeling like their liberty is compromised by having to wear a mask, but then further that their economic freedom and everything else has been compromised by a result of this thing. And those in a lot of cases are the people that are kind of opposing this move to a quote unquote nanny state, and have kind of found a rallying point in sort of the drastic measures that have needed to be undertaken in order to protect the country. It's a mess.
It's an absolute mess. But On some good news, among the top 10 Google search recipes, banana bread and pancakes ranked number 1 and number 2 this past week. So, we've talked a little bit about baking before, and I saw a comment in the New York Times yesterday from the American Baking Association talking about how it's going through the roof and so on. Do we think that baking is going to be the new, hot trend?
Think it already is.
Yeah.
I made my first lattice apple pie and it came out awesome. And I didn't even brag about it because I was like insecure. But as I look back on it, it was wonderful. It didn't taste wonderful, but it looked like $1 million. But I digress. The reason I baked that apple pie, though, Phil, was because I had a personal surplus of apples. When my son came back from college, he brought his 5-pound bag. I had a 5-pound bag. We had a surplus of apples. So I think it's been also some experimentation and clearing out pantries and using some things that have long been aspirational to our repertoires. Baking is, I don't know. I don't know if that's going to stick around because we'll see. But for the short term, by all means, if you walk down a baked goods aisle, I mean, the flour shortage is all over the headlines about people like holding out for flour. So Kat's our bakery expert. Kat, what's your thoughts?
Well, I know personally, I hadn't started baking at the beginning of this, but I just last night at 9:30 p.m., because time means nothing in a pandemic and quarantine, baked my second batch of chocolate chip cookies without the chocolate chips because I don't like the chocolate chips. But
well, then they're just cookies, not chocolate chip
yeah,
cookies.
But they're not like sugar cookies. There's some kind of weird cookie. But I'm now dangerously low on flour, so I think I maybe have one more batch before I have to call it quits unless I can find some flour. But I think baking is something like my grandmother is the one who taught me how to bake. And my dad was the baker in my family. It was his mom who taught me. And I think it's just something that is very easy to do with kids, keeps them entertained. So I think there's going to be a lot of maybe some great traditions started, hopefully, where, families are baking together and, maybe once we return to normal and they have a Saturday afternoon again free, they'll just say, hey, can we bake some brownies like we used to? So
well, what's the implication?
I would only, Phil, I was only going to say a shout out to my sister, Christy, who is teaching her 2 granddaughters to bake.
Oh,
they're
yeah.
really enjoying it. They're making memories and they're making something delicious.
So what's the long-term implication for in-store bakeries in supermarkets? Because what we've seen over the past couple of years, and Kroger's been doing it for 50 years, having robust in-store bakeries that have really upped the ante. If you go into Hy-Vee, you look at their cake department, you look at their bread departments and so on, they're superb. Right now, a lot of them are closed in the stores. Will they reopen, or are we going to go back to in-store bakery, or are we now just taking that home the same way we're seeing, people not going out to restaurants, eating at home, and there's a lot of questions whether or not when restaurants open up, people will actually go to them because it's not going to be as much fun, number one. There's not going to be as many people. We're probably going to have servers who have to wear masks and rubber gloves. So that whole experience changes. Are we going to see the same thing in bakery? Jen, what do you think?
Well, I know, H-E-B a couple weeks ago reopened its bakery and service deli, which had been closed in stores, since the beginning of the pandemic. So that was encouraging. I mean, I'm sure that everything is prepackaged, which is, the stores in my area in Denver have all switched to that. And I think, that's something that's going to be a lasting impact of this, that they may still be making things in store, but they're all going to be packaged to go.
I have a pretty strong feeling that in-store bakeries are going to remain viable. I think we're going to see a different setup, but really there's things that can't be replicated in a home kitchen, hamburger rolls, croissants. There's a lot of things that bakeries excel at. What I think would be a great solution or a great way to tackle it is, to Jen's point, ample self-serve, plastic. Everything's going to have to be like the bins, to me, bins for bagels and donuts and cases and rolls, loose rolls, like, yeah, those days are done. However, again, as we talked about a little bit last week with the salad bars, take those things behind the counter. Do we revert to a corner bakery model, a legitimate corner bakery model in store that it provides exceptional experience and maybe puts things in boxes and does the twine around it to reminisce about an old-fashioned corner bakery? Because a lot of the retailers have signage that say corner bakery or old,
right,
but they're just really a self-serve station. So taking that up a notch, that they could probably also improve their quality processes and shrink. Kat.
Well, and to your point, Meg, too, there's a lot of products that bakeries make that are hard when you try to replicate them in your own kitchen. So definitely. I think we probably will have enough product fails, where people have tried to something like, not everybody's going to make the perfect lattice pie, Meg. So they're going to realize that, those things are difficult to make, or they have ingredients that maybe aren't very easily sourced. And so I think where in-store bakeries really have a chance to shine is to really showcase those products that aren't as easy to make. It's easy to make most cookies in your home kitchen, and takes not a whole lot of time. But if you get into the more complicated things that, like the show pastries and all those kind of things that people still want, but are very difficult to make in the home.
Bakery cleanup is a drag in your kitchen too. So that's why I also say people are going to eventually, everything is going to become fatiguing. That includes baking bread at home. People might just eventually say, you know what, I just want somebody else to make me a high quality loaf of bread that I can get it sliced and walk out the door. Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, Kat, this morning I read your story, great column, bye-bye bonus pay. Tell us about it.
So what we're starting to see now is, when this pandemic started, a bunch of retailers implemented, it was usually a $2 an hour pay increase. Was not meant to be permanent, was meant to be just get
an incentive
through this pandemic. And so now we're starting to see companies, retailers do an endpoint. Like Kroger last week announced that their bonus pay was going to end on May 16th. So on May 17th, regular pay would revert back to regular pay. Other retailers have extended that through the end of May, but haven't given any indication whether end of May is going to be the deadline or if it's going to be extended. But that also raises the question of, is now the time to end the bonus pay, or should it extend? When do we decide that the pandemic is over? So it's raising an issue within the retailers themselves of, the unions have gotten involved saying, they're still frontline employees, first responders, they're still putting their lives on the line. But when you really don't see an end in sight, how long does this go on?
Well, and what is the impact for somebody who is a minimum wage person that have heard for the past 2 years about this $15 an hour movement? They get $2 an hour extra. Maybe they're now up to $15, and all of a sudden it's taken away from them. What about the employee morale of that? Forget about first responders, incentives, whatever else, but you gave it to me. Now you're going to take it back. Hey, you know something? I'm just not going to come to work, or I'm going to find a different job, or I'm just not going to give it all. Aren't we really at risk of that?
I mean,
Phil, there's a lot of, considerations that they're probably going into this, the algebra of figuring this out. One thing is that unemployment is going into, the stratosphere, and, that's going to be an opportunity for them to, to hire if necessary. I'm sure Kroger has given a lot of thought to this and kind of done the math on where their sales levels have wound up, what their costs are. A lot of the retailers have reported, their quarterlies already and forecasting, guess what, second quarter, we're going to have to pay for all this, sales increase and safety measures we've taken in stores coming up. So, I mean, that's a part of it. I agree with you, Phil. It's not necessarily about, whether they're life-saving workers necessarily, but was a reflection of the needed help in the stores and the huge volumes that we're seeing in March.
Let's
I
not
think it's hard to go.
Go ahead, Jen.
I think it's hard. I think it seems premature to curtail the salary bump. I mean, you've still got employees dealing. As recently as I think yesterday, someone at an HEB store threw meat and a bag of lettuce at a checkout worker because they were told that there was a limit on buying meat. I mean, they're not only dealing with having to ask customers to wear masks, putting themselves at risk of getting the virus by being in a store with hundreds of other people a day, but also not being treated well by a certain percentage of the shoppers, and it just seems that it's a little early to pull the plug on the salary hike.
Completely agree, Jen. I completely agree. Because I'm thinking this is the last time you actually want to disincentivize your frontline teams in grocery. I mean, things are still rough out there. Let's not kid ourselves. That's what I was really going to say is the out of stocks are still bad. So people go into a store in a very defensive mode. We got to keep our frontline teams motivated.
And natural grocers, they implemented the $2 an hour increase. And then I think two weeks ago, or a month ago, they said $1 of that is going to be permanent. So, they've
solution.
Yeah, they've given the $1 an hour a raise. They haven't given a complete end date for when that extra $2, the extra $1 an hour will go away. But they kind of found that middle ground where, we're giving you a raise, thank you, and this is going to be good for the duration.
Yeah, and if I could add just one point, the retailers for some time have been dealing with state rules escalating the minimum wages, coming up in this fight for 15, which is slowly bringing salaries up. And at the same time, and going into this crisis, several of them were in the process of major cost reduction efforts, in part to pay the higher hourly salaries they had to do. Albertsons was talking about cutting $1 billion in costs by 2021. Walmart's Great Workplace Initiative. Kroger was doing culling of middle management staffs in stores. Hy-Vee, a big program of cost reductions. So this pandemic came along at a point where these guys had already decided, guess what, we've got to do more with less, particularly because, our state are telling us that we have to pay them more. So it's of course, you don't want to say that, this is, great for the workers, but, it's put the retailers in a tough spot because they were already, in a process of sort of escalating salaries at the same time, and then they've got to find other ways to pay for that.
Let me head to Facebook, and then Jen, I want to ask you what's going on at Smart and Final. But Gene Moses says, here in South Carolina, restaurants are now open with social distancing measures. How will grocery supply chains be affected? Many wholesalers had chains scramble to shift their products to grocers and food banks. Any comments?
I've talked to quite a few people, mostly in regards to the meat supply, where I've asked that now that, food service is starting to open up, is that going to create a bigger strain on our supply chain? Because, we're seeing retailers implement limits on how much can be purchased. And most of them indicated that it's probably not going to be a huge issue. Not a lot of the food service ended up being routed to retail. And the fact that they all are expecting it to take a long time for restaurants to recover. So they're like, if they're operating at 25% or 50%, then they're not going to be having a huge demand. So pretty much everyone I spoke to didn't foresee that being a huge issue.
Jen, what's going on at Smart and Final?
Yeah, so they've, and we were talking about at yesterday's meeting that it's kind of something similar to what TJ Maxx Home Goods has done for years to kind of control traffic before COVID-19 was a problem. But Smart and Final's devised this new system where shoppers wait behind a gate and then are alerted by monitors that say, that instruct them about social distancing and then let them know when a check stand is open. So there's only one checkout line, which, allows for, greater efficiencies. So
really queuing the same way commissaries do, the same way we find in airports, as we have to go through lines of security and so on. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
Phil, and we said too at our meeting, it seems like such a no-brainer that Smart and Final adopted this. Will we see other retailers taking this lead? Grocery retailers. I think it makes a ton of sense. The front end is a lot of pent-up hostilities as it is after the shopping experience is done. So I just think it makes a ton of sense.
The whole stores here in New York have done that as well. That's several years ago, and they did it primarily, I think, because they had such great volume of people in the stores at the time that they were trying to get people to the checkout stands, which aren't big and don't have those giant belts because space is at a premium in New York. But those lines, they look intimidating as you get to them, but it actually moves pretty efficiently. It works pretty well.
But how, Jen, is Smart and Final dealing with the distancing? Because, before this, the queue lines, whether it's at a commissary or any place else, you'd have shopper basket, shopper basket, shopper basket, not necessarily 6 feet apart. Are they able to control the whole social distancing part?
Well, I'm not sure if they're limiting the number of people in store. They probably are, as everyone is. So once inside, there's markers for 6 feet apart, and I think, in a way, you're more able to control that. I know at my local store they're not doing that, and it gets really, each line is like extending into the aisles, which are supposed to be one way, which are getting crowded. So I think this has potential.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's wrap up with some good news. Meg, give us some good news.
Well, Jen is our some grocery good news guru, but I think we had a lot. But pretty much my favorite one of Jen's summary last week was what Dierbergs in St. Louis did. So we talked a couple weeks ago also about the food bars and the salad bars and what retailers are doing to keep them stocked. And so Dierbergs made a mini bar out of their hot bins.
A bar meaning alcohol bar?
Yes.
The little teeny airplane bottles.
Oh, really?
Put a hot price on them and turned it into a little cosmopolitan bar in store to go. But go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, no, I thought that was my favorite too. I think it was.
That's a bar I can get behind in the store.
Exactly. And other cool ones. I thought, H-E-B is doing a virtual graduation for all the 2020, whether it's high school and college graduates in Texas on the 20th. I thought that was we keep talking about how grocers are more than just a place to buy food, that they're a part of the community. And I thought that was a cool way to, acknowledge the young people graduating this year.
A lot of them work in the stores too, right? A lot of high school
exactly.
kids working in grocery, and they're missing their prom, they're missing graduation, they're missing their sports teams and other social activities. It's nice to see grocers step up and help to do that stuff for them.
And with that, that's the good news, two good newses for the day. Join us on Thursday, 9:30 Pacific, 12:30 Eastern, right here. If you've missed any of the past episodes, feel free to go to Winsight Grocery Business Facebook page. They're right there, or Supermarket Guru Facebook page, and on the website as well. Until then, be safe, and you know what I'm going to do.
You do that.
I'm going to have a cookie.
Exactly. A cookie and a mask.
Made these.
Thanks to everybody for joining us, and we'll see you on Thursday.
Great chatting, Phil, as always. Thank you.